Happy almost weekend. Welcome. Programming note, as a reminder, not that you need to got the white balance having a little problem there on camera, I think. Just as a reminder, which you don't need to be reminded of, tomorrow the UN headquarters will be closed, given that it's an official holiday in our host country. It is their Independence Day, and we wish them a happy Independence Day. We will be back here on Monday, and as usual during the weekends and holidays, we will unfortunately remain available to you if you have any questions. Also, just on the technical side, over the weekend, a number of our web platforms, including Web TV, the UN News, all the UN photo and video, will be undergoing scheduled maintenance as they're moving from one hosting platform to another. On the back end, there should not be any problems, but if there are, I would just ask you to be a little bit patient. Travel announcement regarding the Secretary General. On Saturday, July 5th, the Secretary General will be arriving in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil to attend the 17th summit of the BRICS countries. The Secretary General has been invited to speak at an outreach session on strengthening multilateralism, economic, financial affairs, and artificial intelligence. That will take place on Sunday, July 6th. On Monday, on the 7th, he will address the second outreach session on environment, COP30, and global health. During his visit, the Secretary General will also be having meetings with various leaders who are attending the BRICS Summit, and we will share those readouts with you. Our Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, returned to Seville today for the closing of the fourth international conference on financing for development. At the closing, the Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez of Spain, she attended the closing along with the Prime Minister of Spain, Pedro Sanchez. During her remarks, she underscored the consensus around the Sevilla Agreement as a demonstration of multilateralism in action, with actions to close the SDG financing gap, address the debt crisis, and reform the international financial architecture. She recognized the more than 100 initiatives launched on the Sevilla Platform for Action, including solidarity levies on private jets and first-class travel to generate new resources for sustainable development. She said that the UN will be operationalizing a Seville Forum on debt to help countries learn from one another and coordinate their approaches in debt management and restructuring, and that forum will be supported by the government of Spain, and we thank them. She called for the conference to be remembered not only as a conference that responded to crisis, but as the moment the world chose cooperation over fragmentation, unity over division, and action over inertia. Tomorrow, she will travel to Praia in Cabo Verde to take part in the celebration marking the 50th anniversary of the country's independence. And I have a statement to share with you on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. I can tell you that the Secretary General is appalled by the deepening humanitarian situation in Gaza. Multiple attacks in recent days hitting sites hosting displaced people and people trying to access food have killed and injured scores of Palestinians. The Secretary General condemns the loss of civilian life. In just one day this week, Israeli orders to relocate forced nearly 30,000 people to flee yet again with no safe place to go and clearly inadequate supplies of shelter, of food, of medicine, and of water. International humanitarian law is unambiguous. Civilians must be respected. Civilians must be protected. And the needs of the population need to be met. With no fuel having entered Gaza in more than 17 weeks, the Secretary General is gravely concerned that the last lifelines for survival are being cut off. Without an urgent influx of fuel, incubators will shut down. Ambulances will be unable to reach the injured and the sick, and water will not be able to be purified. The delivery by the United Nations and our partners of what little of our life-saving humanitarian aid is left in Gaza will grind to a halt. The Secretary General once again calls for full, safe, and sustained humanitarian access so aid can reach people who have been deprived of the basics of survival for way too long. The UN has a clear and proven plan rooted in the humanitarian principles to get vital assistance to civilians, to do that safely and at scale wherever those people are. The Secretary General reiterates that all parties must uphold their obligations under international law. He renews his call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire and for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages held by Hamas and other groups. That statement is now being shared with you. And just to give you a bit more detail of what is actually going on the ground, I can tell you that the space left for civilians to stay is shrinking by the day. Just yesterday, Israeli authorities issued yet another displacement order, this time for parts of Gaza City, citing Palestinian rockets fire. Our colleagues estimate that about 40,000 people were in these areas, which included one displacement site, one medical point, and a neighborhood that has been spared from any displacement order since before the ceasefire. As of earlier today, about 900 families are estimated to have fled. OCHA notes that since mid-March, when the ceasefire ended, over 50 such orders have been issued. Together, they now cover about 78% of the Gaza Strip. And the Israeli militarized zones, and that if you add the Israeli militarized zone, and that percentage jumps to 85%, leaving just 15% where civilians can actually stay. Those areas are, of course, overcrowded. They also severely lack any services or basic services and proper infrastructure. One can just imagine having just over 2 million people stuck in Manhattan, which is actually slightly bigger than Gaza, but instead of buildings, the area is strewn with the rubble of demolished and burnt-out structures without any infrastructure or basic support. And in Gaza, these remaining areas are also fragmented and unsafe. Yesterday, our colleagues from the UN Population Fund said that menstruation has become a nightmare for an estimated 700,000 women and girls in Gaza. They remind us that alongside food, people need water, soap, menstrual pads, and privacy. UNFPA notes that it has supplies ready, almost 170 truckloads worth, but they are not being led into the Gaza Strip. In a report issued yesterday, OCHA notes that since last Thursday, 9 more aid workers have been killed from 5 different organizations. That brings together the total number of aid workers killed to 107 so far this year, and 479 since October 2023. Among them, 326 of our UN colleagues. Looking back at the month of June, out of nearly 400 coordination attempts, 44% were outright denied by Israeli authorities. Another 10% were initially accepted but then faced impediments. Only a third were fully facilitated, and the rest, which is about 12%, had to be canceled by the organizers for logistical, operational security reasons. Today, we've had 4 denials out of 16 coordination attempts, hindering our team's effort to relocate medical supplies and remove debris, among other critical operations. Moving north to Lebanon this week, the newly appointed head of our UNIFIL peacekeeping mission and force commander, Major General Deodato Abanyara, met with Lebanese leaders, including the President, Joseph Aoun, the Speaker of the Parliament, Nabi Berri, the Prime Minister, Nawaf Salam, as well as the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Defense and the commanders of the Lebanese armed forces. General Abanyara underscored in his meeting the mission's support to the implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701, including the strengthened deployment of the Lebanese armed forces in the southern part of their country. On the ground, UNIFIL peacekeepers reported Israel Defense Forces' military presence and its activities north of the Blue Line, including air violations and mortar fires impacting several locations in Sector East this week. Meanwhile, peacekeepers have also continued to discover unauthorized weapons caches, including one containing mortars in Sector East. This week, also, UNIFIL supported the important work of humanitarian agencies by facilitating missions from OCHA, UNICEF, UNDP, the UN Refugee Agency, and the World Food Program in the UNIFIL area of operations. In support of the capacity building of the Lebanese armed forces, the UNIFIL Maritime Task Force this week carried out training exercises for the Lebanese Navy and the Lebanese Air Force. And a note on Cyprus, in addition to what we said yesterday, in preparation for the informal talks on Cyprus in the broader format that will be held in New York on July 16th and 17th. The personal envoy of the Secretary General in Cyprus, Mariangela Holgan, is traveling to the island this week for meetings with the two sides. Earlier this week, she met with senior representatives of the United Kingdom in London, as well as the European Union in Brussels. She will visit Paris on Friday for meetings with French officials. Turning to Ukraine, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reports that airstrikes in the past 3 days have killed and injured civilians. According to authorities, at least 10 civilians were killed and nearly 60 injured, including children. The strikes also damaged homes, hospitals, schools, and agricultural supplies in frontline regions. According to local authorities and aid workers, the Donetsk region alone, authorities reported damage to over 80 homes, schools, and other civilian facilities across the region. Health facilities have not been spared. On July 1st, shelling damaged a hospital in Kherson, injuring at least 3 health workers and 5 patients. Today, drone strikes in the same city damaged several ambulances, civilian vehicles, and windows of another hospital building. Between January and June of this year, WHO recorded 255 attacks on healthcare facilities in Ukraine, accounting for nearly 40% of all such attacks verified globally. In 2025, these attacks caused at least 6 deaths, 55 injuries among medical personnel and patients. That's what the World Health Organization is telling us. Humanitarians continue to respond, providing construction materials, emergency shelter kits, blankets, hygiene items, and mental health and psychosocial support. And Alex, I think you had a question a number of times on the Memorandum of Understanding. And I can tell you that the final consultations meetings on the Memorandum of Understanding between the United Nations and the Russian Federation will take place on 11th July in Geneva. It will be led by Rebecca Greenspan, as it always is. She is, of course, you know, the Secretary General of the UN Trade and of UNCTAD, excuse me. The Memorandum of Understanding was signed on the 22nd of July 2022 with an implementation period of 3 years as part of the efforts, as part of the Istanbul Agreement and the efforts of the Secretary General on global food security and in the context of the war in Ukraine. In parallel, the Secretary General has also continued to advocate for continued exports from Ukraine and the Russian Federation, including through the proposal on safe navigation in the Black Sea, which continues to inform discussions. And we will share that with you in writing. Also want to read into the record an announcement that went out yesterday evening about the newly appointed Special Representative of the Secretary General for Haiti. And that new special representative is Carlos Ruiz Massieu of Mexico. He will be the SRSG and head of the UN Integrated Office in Haiti. He succeeds Maria Isabel Salvador of Ecuador, to whom the Secretary General is grateful for her dedication and service. Mr. Massieu, as you know, is currently the head of the UN verification mission in Colombia since 2019, and he has over 30 years of experience in public service and diplomacy, both in bilateral and multilateral context. An important note, though, Mr. Massieu, Ruiz Massieu will assume his new functions as SRSG for Haiti in August. He will be here in 2 weeks' time to brief the Security Council on Colombia. Also on Yemen, some good news coming out of Yemen. Our UN team on the ground is telling us that the 2 local water authorities in the Taiz Governorate, the local water and sanitation corporations in Taiz and the Al Hauban, reached a technical agreement jointly to manage the water supply systems, restoring essential services that have been disrupted for nearly a decade due to conflict and institutional fragmentation. This milestone was made possible through the sustained engagement of the United Nations team in Yemen, working alongside key partners to accelerate water access. The Yemen Humanitarian Fund is allocating $2 million to connect 90,000 people to a functioning water network. We commend the local leadership behind this breakthrough and urge donors to scale up their support so over 600,000 people living in Taiz can finally access safe and reliable water and sanitation. If you are looking for some interesting reading this weekend, if I can recommend the inaugural UN Global Risk Report. It's being launched. It actually is interesting. It is being launched today at 1 p.m., both online and an event hosted by the Mission of Singapore. The key insight of this report is a set of 12 global vulnerabilities, which are risks that are perceived as both important and for which the international community is unprepared. Many risk reports can provide a list of the most important risks, but this report focuses our attention on perceived gaps in the multilateral space. It identifies mis- and disinformation as a singularly critical vulnerability and identifies 3 other clusters of risks that are technological, environmental, and societal. Specifically, the report highlights that these global vulnerabilities can be best addressed through coordinated joint action between member states and across stakeholder groups. It can be found on the web at unglobalriskreport.org. And since we won't see each other tomorrow, I don't want to leave you without mentioning 2 international days. Saturday is the International Day of Cooperatives. Cooperatives have a local community focus, and they aspire to bring benefits of this economic and social model to all people in the world. Sunday is World Rural Development Day. The day aims at elevating rural voices and renewing the world's collective promise, which is to leave no one behind, not even in the most remote and forgotten place of the world. I have a quiz for you today. I know. How many people do deep sea diving here?
Oh, no, you do
Deep sea. I mean, below the water, at least. Yes. Okay. This scuba.
Scuba diving.
Yeah. Yeah. You scuba. Yeah. Scuba. You scuba?
Do deep sea.
Oh, deep sea. It's just about trying to make it more exotic for Gabriel. This country's most famous dive site is the SS President Coolidge, a shipwrecked luxury liner that was serving as a troop transport ship during the Second World War. The ship sank in 1942 after making contact with mines off Espiritu Santo Island, the largest island of this archipelago nation. Nope. Nope. Okay, I'll give you another hint. The capital of this country is Port Vila. Yes, who said Vanuatu? You see? That's the second one you've won, Chris.
Chris, come up here.
Yeah, exactly. Claim your prize. All right, let's go back to New York from Vanuatu. Deji.
Yes. Let's talk about the hostages that kept by Hamas in Gaza. You said there are 17 weeks that no fuel entered, and there's rarely humanitarian deliveries. Does the UN have any information of the whereabouts or conditions of the still remaining hostages?
The information that we have and that we've been getting is through the regular meetings the Secretary General has had with the families of Israeli hostages and former hostages, but we do not have any direct information.
Does the Secretary General worry if the condition continues in Gaza without food, without fuel, with more evacuation orders, there will be less and less chance for those
I think
hostages to survive?
the longer this goes on, the more people will suffer, whether they're the Palestinian civilians or whether they're the hostages being held by Hamas.
So another thing is, yesterday I believe you saw the report from AP about the Gaza Humanitarian Fund. 2 American contractors said they are very disturbed and feel irresponsible that there's live ammunition fired at the site, which got rejected by the fund. Does the UN have any comments on this?
Well, I mean, comment is what we've been telling you about the operations of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation since the beginning, that they do not meet the most basic standards that anyone should want to meet, which is when you're trying to help people, you're not putting them at greater risk. Yes, Jordan, and then we'll...
Steph, there is a big perception in Middle East, actually in the world, that the United Nations has failed to protect the Palestinian people, and also, as you just mentioned, 326 UN staff. Also, you are unable, the United Nations, not you, unable to protect even your own staff. How can you reply to that?
Well, I mean,
Thank you.
which United Nations are you speaking about? Are you speaking about the inability of the Security Council to come together? Are you speaking?
The United Nations system.
But that's, you know, I think people have to understand the complexity of the UN system, and we rely on you as journalists to explain that. I think the Secretary General and all of the UN humanitarian staff and other staff who remain in Gaza are doing their best to protect civilians, to help civilians stay alive by at least providing them with the limited amount of means that we have. What is clear is that in this conflict and in others, as the Secretary General said last week, if I'm not mistaken, international law, the charter itself, is being repeatedly violated, and countries are choosing to. Too many countries are choosing to see the charter and international law as an a la carte menu, as opposed to standing up and believing and implementing the commitments they themselves have signed on to. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Stéphane. This is Minglu from China Daily. The U.S. and Vietnam have reportedly to reach to a trade agreement that removes tariffs on the U.S. goods to Vietnam, while the Vietnam goods exporting to the U.S. are facing higher tariffs. Does the UN have any comment on how this treatment will influence developing countries and global trade fairness?
I mean, we don't have any comment on this specific agreement, or I mean, we're not even sure there's an agreement. What we do believe is that the Secretary General believes in a global trade system that needs to be fair, and especially fair to those countries that are most vulnerable. Alex.
Thanks, Steph. Firstly, quick follow-up on UN Web TV and other sources. Is it somehow connected with UN 80 initiative?
No, not at all. No.
All right.
Not
Secondly,
everything is connected to UN 80 initiative.
I had to follow up.
I mean, I saw the Mets win yesterday. I don't think that was connected to the UN 80 initiative.
Sure.
Yeah.
Secondly, follow up on this UN-Russian memorandum. So what will happen after this memorandum expires?
Well, the Memorandum of Understanding will not be extended. It had a shelf life of 3 years. However, the issues around it remain, right? And that for us includes the developing and the protection of safe trade routes through the Black Sea. So a lot of the issues that the memo addressed will continue to live on and will continue to be discussed between the United Nations, the Russian Federations, and others.
And last one, President Putin and President Trump held a phone conversation. Have any comments on that?
I mean, we've just seen that they spoke. As I've said in other cases, we welcome high-level dialogue between leaders of these United Nations. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Rachel from 21st Century Business Herald, Guangdong, China. So I just recently saw a new report from the United Nations Economic and Social Committee for Asia and the Pacific mentions a 2.5 to 4 trillion USD dollars in annual financing gap for developing countries. So I'm wondering, as China is now one of the largest creditors to developing countries, how does the UN view China's potential role in advancing global financial collaboration?
To be honest, I have not seen that report. I will put you in touch with its authors so you can ask them. But I try not to speak about things I don't know. Doesn't always work, but that's what I try to do. Go ahead, Deji.
Yesterday, WHO urged countries to increase health tax on tobaccos, alcohols, and sugar-contained beverages to at least 50% of its price. Do you worry that would affect your champagne drinking in your bottle.
Have a great weekend.